So what we'd like to do now is pick up, again, you're in Bio 212 at Norwalk Community College, and what we're working on is Chapter 18, the Endocrine System. What I've done is I've gone to the end of the chapter and brought the stress response just after the introduction material here. And the reason for that is not because I want to tell you that you need stress in your life and all that sort of stuff. You actually do, but who really cares about that? What I want you to do is realize that the stress response is the entire body's response to multiple inputs. And what happens, of course, is the textbook breaks down the individual patterns of hormone production to the gland and its targets. And I think sometimes students lose lose perspective as to how Mother Nature actually has to integrate all of this. It's a really good opportunity for you to see how Mother Nature regulates the actual ebb and flow of, if we think about the ebb and flow of normal homeostasis, right? Even though this is a really bad drawing, you can see that eustress is a helpful stress, whereas distress is harmful. You can see eustress being something good, distress breaking down whatever is happening inside the body. We'll see how that actually all works in a couple of seconds. Stressful conditions result in a stress response or a general adaptation syndrome. There are 3 stages to it. The stuff you learned in AMP, which is, not AMP, but psychology, which is your fight or flight. The stuff you want to be thinking about now is you have slower resistance reactions, meaning Mother Nature has to start making a decision as to what resources can be devoted towards your response to stress, until eventually you actually hit exhaustion. Prolonged exposure to cortisol can result in the wasting of muscle, suppression of your immune system, ulceration of the GI tract, and failure of pancreatic beta cells. And if you remember from lecture, or even your own reading, the beta cells are responsible for detecting what? These are the concentration of glucose inside the bloodstream and therefore insulin inside the bloodstream. Okay? So let's take a look at this figure here. And there's a lot going on here, and it's assuming you have a working vocabulary of everything that happens inside the endocrine system. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. Here we are. I'm going to draw more of this brain in for you to make sure you know where you are. This is a brain. We're going to put a cerebellum back here. We're going to put that there. Pons, medulla. Okay, spinal cord. Okay. And what you actually have here is the hypothalamus, and stressors are being detected, and some signal is going to cause the production of some hormones, and those hormones are going to act on a different area of the pituitary gland, the anterior pituitary gland, and it's going to release a series of hormones, ACTH, HGH, and TSH. Don't even really worry what they are. Just notice that something had to be detected inside the brain. A hormone was made. Hormone targets another area of, in this case, the nervous system. And then we're going to make another population of hormones. And those populations of hormones are now going to travel through the circulatory system. And that target tissue will now respond. In this case, stress responses will cause lipolysis, gluconeogenesis, protein catabolism, which is to break down a protein, sensitized blood vessels, meaning increase or decrease constriction, and reduced inflammation. So cortisol can do all of these things. Simultaneously, human growth hormone over here will release insulin-like growth factors, which will cause lipolysis, breakdown of lipids, and glycogenolysis. So we're going to break down glycogen. TSH is going to release T3 and T4, and from AMP1 we know that T3 and T4 make all of the sodium, potassium ATPases. So therefore, you can have an increased use of glucose to produce ATP inside of those cells. So this is what's happening in resistance reactions. That fight or flight state that you learned back in your psychology class has increased heart rate, constriction of blood vessels, dilation of blood vessels of the heart, lungs, brain, and skeletal muscles. These are all things that are required for you to stay alive. So even though I seem to make light of them, okay, this is only one piece of everything else that's actually happening inside your body. So this is the significance of the endocrine system, and this is why I actually put it in there. And it's also a very good leaping off point for us to actually now think about how does the central nervous system detect information, and then make decisions to respond. That brings us to our hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Okay, so you're in AMPT, which means I assume you understand that there's a central nervous system that's separated from the actual rest of the body. Yay. And what I've drawn for you here is the cortex of the brain, and over here is the infundibulum, and this is the pituitary gland, which means if I draw in this thing like this, put that little dot in it, you know you're inside the diencephalon, where the epithalamus is up here, hypothalamus is down here, and this makes the diencephalon part of those three regions. The hypothalamus is the major link between the nervous system and the endocrine system. That's because, remember that there are 13, oops, something's going wrong here, 13 different nuclei that are collecting information, interpreting what needs to be done, and then they're going to release some signal. They will do their work in a mechanism I'll explain in a moment. What I want to make sure you understand is that you actually have two parts to the pituitary gland. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to color in that back piece back here. So you can actually see there's an anterior pituitary gland, A, and there's a posterior pituitary gland, P. Okay? Anterior pituitary gland, adenohypophysis, posterior pituitary gland, neurohypophysis. Much prettier picture of it can be seen inside your textbook, and it looks like this, where the pituitary gland is now inside the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. Okay, so that would be right about here. And one thing I want you to see is you actually have a circulatory structure that surrounds the entire pituitary gland. Okay, it's called the hypophyseal portal system, and you can see there's the superior piece to it here. Superior is just called the superior hypophyseal artery. You have down here the anterior hypophyseal vein, and then over here you're going to see that you actually have the posterior hypophyseal veins as well. And what this means is we're going to make materials here inside the hypothalamus. They're going to be collected into the primary plexus of the hypophyseal portal system. They'll be delivered here to the anterior pituitary gland, and they'll be released. And they're going to target 5 populations of cells: somatotrophs, S, thyrotrophs, T, gonadotrophs, G, lactotrophs, L, and corticotrophs, C. We come back to what each of these things do in a minute, but let's make sure we understand something. Notice our hormones that regulated our anterior pituitary gland were released into the circulatory system to target cells inside the anterior pituitary gland. There are 5 populations of those cells: S, T, G, L, and C: somatotrophs, thyrotrophs, gonadotrophs, lactotrophs, corticotrophs. And then it has its own biology. Each of these are going to make a series of hormones. The tricky part is you actually have hypothalamic neurosecretory cells that send axons to the posterior pituitary gland. And over here, there are 2 hormones you need to pay attention to: ADH, antidiuretic hormone. Throughout the course of this class, you will have seen this many times. And then oxytocin, which we come back to. Oxytocin. We come back to inside chapters 28 and 29, especially towards the end of this one as well. Okay, so this is setting up the stage for you. You now can see that Mother Nature is going to use a mechanism that requires the circulatory system for us to make hormones in one location and then have them act at another location. All right, so let's get rid of the cartoons. The release of hormones stimulated by releasing and inhibiting hormones from the hypothalamus will cause the activation of hormones that are called tropic hormones. Okay? So what this means is, let's go back to this cartoon here. We're going to have a family of hormones here. Whoa, don't do that, Jonathan. Put that back where it belongs. Go like this. We're going to have a family of hormones here. They're going to be releasing hormones or inhibiting hormones. And what that means is these are made here travel into that circulatory system. They act here on these populations of cells down here. And if it's a releasing hormone, guess what? It causes a hormone to be released from here. And those will be tropic hormones, T hormones. And if it's an inhibiting hormone, it stops the release of materials from here. Okay, so one more time. Releasing hormones will cause the production and release of hormones from the anterior pituitary gland. Inhibiting hormones will inhibit the production and the release of hormones in the anterior pituitary gland. So we can go like this. We can go like this. And now look at all the verbiage again. Hypothalamic hormones made by neurosecretory cells are transported by that hypophyseal portal system, where those anterior hormones can act on endocrine systems via tropic hormones. Okay? What are they? Well, we have 2 slides to go over the introduction to these things, right? Human growth hormone, or somatostatin, stimulates the secretion of insulin-like growth factors. So HGH causes IGFs. Okay? They promote growth and protein synthesis. Thyroid-stimulating hormone, or thyrotropin, stimulates the synthesis and secretion of thyroid hormones by the thyroid gland. Okay, point to your thyroid gland. Follicle-stimulating hormone. Okay. Ovary initiates the development of oocytes, and testes stimulates the testosterone production. Okay, so there's a couple of different things that are happening here. One is going to cause steroid hormone production. For males. For females, it drives the development of oocytes, and these are meiotically reduced cells. Luteinizing hormone stimulates ovulation in females. Testes stimulate, inside testes, luteinizing hormone stimulates testosterone production. There seems to be some redundancy here. Let's figure that out a little bit later. Prolactin promotes milk secretion by the mammary glands. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, or corticotropin, stimulates glucocorticoid secretion by the adrenal glands. All these are getting really fancy words. And then melanocyte stimulating hormone, MSH, okay, has an unknown role inside humans. Okay, I believe there's some discussion as to its role inside circadian rhythms, but beyond that, it's not anything you want to concern yourself with. So, how does all of this work then? Well, in one example, your textbook moves to first, right? It says negative feedback systems are the basic mechanisms by all of this working. And I'm going to use this as an example for how releasing hormones cause the production of a hormone at some other location inside the body, and that production of that hormone actually shuts off its own production. Okay? So, some signal inside the hypothalamus is saying that we need cortisol inside the body. The hypothalamus makes corticotropin-releasing hormone, CRH. Remember my earlier cartoon, I put an arrow over here and said, look, releasing hormone. That releasing hormone utilizes the hypophyseal portal system. It's missing inside this cartoon, so let's draw it in. I don't know why they do this to you guys. Drive you guys crazy. Okay, so the portal system, okay, actually has, let's make it look like it does in real life. So it looks like this. Okay, and now we're going to go like this. We're going to collect materials here. We're going to deliver them here. Go like that. Now let's make sure you understand what I did. We collected the corticotropin releasing hormone here. We're going to release it here. So the corticotropin releasing hormone targets the cells here. Inside the corticotrophs, we're going to make ACTH. The ACTH is going to now travel to the adrenal cortex, where the adrenal cortex is going to make this molecule called cortisol. Cortisol now, its concentration inside your circulatory system elevates, which inhibits the release of corticotropin by the anterior pituitary corticotroph cells. Okay? It also inhibits the release of corticotrophic releasing hormone by the hypothalamic neurosecretory cells here. So this is what we mean by negative feedback. And it doesn't mean this is the only way that this system works. this is one very good example of how it could work. So let's release this, or erase this, and move to the next one. Another one would be, what are the effects using a negative feedback system of high blood glucose and low blood glucose? The significance being this: we travel inside our circulatory system at a range. Depending on which part of the textbook you're reading, 70 to 110 milligrams per 100 mils. 70 to 110 milligrams per 100 mils blood. Okay, so your body has to keep this inside of this range, and that's actually what you're looking at here. If you have a low level, you have some form of hypoglycemia, okay, what's going to happen is you're going to have GHRH being released here. GHRH is going to cause HGH to be made. HGH now travels with IGFs to speed up the breakdown of liver glycogen, and that breakdown is going to be converted into glucose. Remember, the polymer of glucose is glycogen. So when we break that down, we make more glucose. Glucose enters the blood rapidly, and you'll notice here it says 90 to 100. Other parts of your textbook, it's going to say 70 to 100. And what's going to happen is, if blood glucose levels increase, okay, it's going to cause the inhibition of this, okay, the inhibition of growth hormone releasing hormone. Okay, how does that actually happen? High blood glucose level stimulates GHIH, growth hormone inhibiting hormone, which stops human growth hormone production, which means you're going to slow down the release of glycogen, which means it falls to normal levels, which means if this continues, you're going to now inhibit this because now you are actually in a state of hypoglycemia. So this is what we mean when we say you can have multiple pathways that are using negative feedback systems. Okay? Now, unfortunately, your textbook doesn't do a really good job of keeping this straight for you. They just sort of throw the pathways at you and hope that you can actually put the whole story together. I hopefully will help you figure out how to do all of that. That is erased. So let's go to the posterior pituitary gland. I've already mentioned its significance to you because it doesn't synthesize hormones. Don't be that person. Does not. Let's do this. Does not synthesize hormones. It stores and releases them. Okay? The primary hormones are oxytocin, regulates many things, but in AMP1 we teach you it's the major hormone required for smooth muscle contraction during birth. More importantly for us right now is that you understand antidiuretic hormone and vasopressin, because these regulate the total volume of water in the body. Okay? So we spend the entirety of the semester trying to figure out the significance of this. Not that oxytocin is not important in the grand scheme of things. In fact, they are very similar molecules structurally. Mother Nature wants to make sure that this molecule is present when only needed, though. So how does this actually happen? Oxytocin, it's during and after delivery of the baby, affects the uterus and the breast tissues, enhances smooth muscle contraction, and stimulates milk ejection from the mammary glands themselves. Okay? Antidiuretic hormone, like I said, decreases urine production by causing the kidneys to return more water to the blood. Okay? If you think about ADH and another hormone, aldosterone, okay, you're going to see how they actually work together. Fantastic. So let's wrap our brain around one really important idea here before we actually hit pause. Remember that inside of our body we have a certain volume of water, and that certain volume of water will determine the actual osmolarity of materials inside of our body. And what I want to make sure you understand is that if high blood osmotic pressure stimulates the hypothalamic osmoreceptors, we're going to actually release now ADH, and that ADH will target the kidneys to retain more water, shut off sweat, and constrict arterioles. Don't forget that ADH causes arterial blood constriction. I should say arterial blood vessel constriction. If low blood pressure inhibits hypothalamic osmoreceptors, you're going to have an inhibition of these osmoreceptors, which is going to reduces or stops ADH secretion. Rarely, if ever, do you have no ADH inside your bloodstream. Okay? But if you can imagine, if you stopped this, those wouldn't constrict, you would sweat, and you would allow more urine out of the body. Okay? This is a really good place for us to take a pause as we finish up the last set of slides here in the next set. Okay?